Yeah, it's about time that we talk about this. When Switch Online first released, it came with a selection of Nintendo Entertainment System games. Then a year later, in 2019, they added a collection of Super Nintendo games. Both of those libraries have still been getting updates here and there to this day. Now, while nothing new came in 2020, last year in 2021, we got Nintendo 64 games. And because it has been a year, and because the expansion pack as a whole has been a bit divisive, to say the least, I think it's time that we look back at everything that the service currently offers, what we know we're going to be getting in the future, and kind of going from there. So right now, I think we have a pretty good selection of games. Right here, I have them all organized based off of how long I've played each one of them. Right here, Paper Mario is the game that I've played the most at basically 23 hours. Super Mario 64, right here, I've played for basically 10 hours. And from there, it's really only been a couple hours for these two, and at most an hour for the rest of these. That's not so indicative of the quality of the service, it's just indicative of me forgetting that this is a thing that Nintendo offers on the Switch. So if we sort these by title, we have Banjo-Kazooie, Dr. Mario 64, F-Zero X, Kirby 64 The Crystal Shards, Mario Kart 64, Mario Golf, Zelda Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, Mario Tennis, Paper Mario, Pilot Wing 64, Pokemon Puzzle League, Mario 64, Star Fox 64, Sin and Punishment, Pokemon Snap, Wave Race 64, Winback, and Yoshi's Story. Over the years, I've heard nothing but good things about basically all of these games, and even though there's only a handful of games from here that I've actually spent significant time with, I've had a pretty good experience with the service. Now, the games that are still yet to come, looking at the rest of this year, we have Mario Parties 1 and 2, and next year we have Mario Party 3, so the 3 original Mario Parties are going to be on the Switch, which is interesting because Mario Party, the first one, has not had an official re-release outside of the content that was remade for Mario Party Superstars. And then we have 1080 Snowboarding, Excite Bike 64, Pokemon Stadiums 1 and 2, still yet to come next year, and GoldenEye. It is very surprising that GoldenEye is finally getting an official re-release on a Nintendo system. Now, yeah, there was a remake or whatever on the Wii, but I've not heard favorable things about that version, so I kind of discredit it and kind of forget about it a lot of the times. But anywho, functionally, these games are basically the same as the NES and SNES games, in the sense that we have, if I load up a game here, we have restore points, which are basically save states, so you can save your progress wherever you are currently in the game, reset, and that's basically it. Now, N64 games do not have a rewind feature like NES and SNES, and if we go back to the main menu, we do not have any sort of display options. So I've loaded into the NES app right here, and in the settings we can choose between 4:3 aspect ratio, pixel perfect, which is probably what a lot of people who grew up emulating these games are used to. That's because a lot of emulators, especially back in the day, displayed games. They didn't necessarily take into account the original aspect ratios of TVs, so they basically displayed each pixel at a 1:1 aspect ratio, and we do also have a CRT filter. Now, those things are nice, but not ultimately necessary. However, there are some functionality that Nintendo has yet to implement for N64 games that are on a current system, as well as a feature that was in a previous Virtual Console that is absent. Mario Kart 64 used the controller pack. It was basically just a memory card. Now, it used that memory card to store ghost data for time trials. This was the very first Mario Kart game in the whole series to implement saving ghost data. However, that functionality is not in the Switch Online version. Despite these games being emulated, and the fact that you could very easily just set up an emulated controller pack in an N64 emulator, yeah, this feels a little off. Now really at this moment, this only affects Mario Kart 64 and I believe, is it Winback right here? Yeah, Winback. Now, I haven't played enough Winback to say for certain, but I'm pretty positive Winback straight up uses the controller pack to save data. Now, yeah, you can just use a save state to save your progress, but if Nintendo does bring any games to this service in the future that required the controller pack to actually save game data back in the day, it would be nice if they implemented, like, proper save functionality, like using invisible, like, in the background controller pack. Although, using save states is still functionally the same. Now, one thing that was in the Wii U Virtual Console that isn't in the N64 Switch Online library is custom button mapping, because then we have to deal with this nonsense. So let me try to walk you through this. So, the analog stick on the N64 controller is mapped to the left stick on the Switch controller, the D-pad is mapped to the directional buttons, and the Z trigger that would be found on the controller stick handle, that middle handle on the N64 controller, is mapped to ZL. And even though it's not mentioned anywhere on here, the right shoulder button on the N64 controller is mapped to the right shoulder button on the Switch controller. But then we have this. So the A and B buttons from the N64 controller are mapped to match the same buttons on the Switch controller. Makes sense. But then we have C down and C left on X and Y respectively, which, unless if you commit those to memory, is gonna not be entirely intuitive for a lot of people. And when the service initially released, I did notice that the buttons that they assigned are the same buttons in this diamond shape right here, the A, B, C down, and C left. So I used the custom button mapping to basically make B, A, Y, B, A, C down, and X, C left. And while that custom button mapping is a standard feature on the Switch operating system, it is not part of the app, which for most people is kind of benign, but that does introduce two qualms that I have. First of all, the custom button mapping on the Switch does not support third-party controllers. Now, even though this is officially licensed Afterglow wireless controller by PDP, I really like this controller. However, I cannot use custom button mapping on this because it is a third-party controller, meaning that if I want to use this for N64 games, I have to deal with the way that they mapped these buttons for a lot of the games. As well as the fact that ZR is a modifier button to basically make the face buttons replicate the C buttons. I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that, but it does mean that because N64 games a lot of the times use the Z trigger and the right shoulder button, your fingers are kind of offset and it feels weird. Now yeah, in my custom button mapping that I have saved, these shoulders are swapped, so my fingers are like this and my right thumb is like this, which if I'm using a regular Joy-Con or my official Pro controller, it works perfectly fine, except for the modifier buttons, because then these are essentially rotated, so I straight up cannot use that functionality if I'm using my custom button mapping. Really, what I'm trying to get at is bring back the custom button mapping from the Wii U Virtual Console and implement that directly into the retro catalogs. Custom button mapping wasn't necessarily needed for NES and SNES because those map pretty well to modern controllers, but with the way that the N64 controller is laid out, yeah, we need better options to assign this nonsense to a modern controller. Now, one thing that was an issue that isn't so much an issue now is the quality of some of the games. Basically, Paper Mario had a bug where if you got a game over with Watt as your partner, it would crash the entire Switch Online app, which meant that if you weren't making save states, you were gonna lose your data even if you were saving in-game, because the Switch Online app doesn't apply your save data until you close out of that game. And Kirby 64 straight up had a soft lock that was not in any other official re-release except for this one. Thankfully, those have both been patched out since then, and we haven't really gotten any sort of glitches since. And Nintendo has been retroactively patching some games. Like, people were complaining about some atmospheric elements in Ocarina of Time that weren't in the game originally when the N64 games were originally brought to the Switch, but now they've been somewhat fixed at least. Now the glitches, like from Paper Mario and Kirby 64, like, I can understand people getting upset about those because a lot of people encountered them just through casual play. The complaints that I've heard about, especially Ocarina of Time, I think are people just nitpicking and trying to find something to be angry about. Also, there is some menu slowdown in Paper Mario, which I think is kind of weird, but again, it's kind of a nitpick. And also, there's a whole side to this coin that people kind of forget about, and that's Sega Genesis. Sega! I think I speak for a lot of people when I say this, that I don't know how many people are actually playing the Sega Genesis games. Like, I haven't really actually played anything on here to the point where, like, I've just kept updating this, and I've not touched any of these. I guess this is a reminder to myself, but also anyone that's watching this, that the Genesis games are a thing, and that we should probably actually play them. However, these retro games aren't the only things that are part of the expansion pack. If you have an active membership with Switch Online Expansion Pack, you get the paid DLC for Animal Crossing, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, as well as Splatoon 2. And I think that's a really smart addition to this tier of Nintendo Switch Online, and especially because those are 3 games that all have major online functionality. And to basically get all of those DLC packs for no additional cost as long as you have an active membership, I think is really, really cool. And if they're gonna be adding even more DLC packs to Switch Online Expansion Pack, I think that's going to even further bolster the value of the expansion pack. Which, yeah, I guess I should talk about that. The price. $50 for a single person for a full year, I do think is a bit steep. For me at least. However, you can do a family plan, which, yes, it is $80 for a full year, but you can split that up amongst 8 people, so that's only $10 a year. And that's what I'm doing with 7 other people, so it's only $10 for each of us for an entire year. At that point, it's stupid to not do that. You know, as long as you have 7 other people to do that with. Even if you have, like, 2 or 3 other people to do that with. Like, you're still going to be saving money in the long run, so why not? But yeah, at the end of the day, like, it's very subjective if the expansion pack is worth it or not. Me personally, if you're doing a family plan with at least a handful of other people, it is well worth it. Honestly, I think Switch Online would have a way better reputation with a lot of the hardcore audience if they didn't paywall online play and arguably cloud saves behind that Switch Online membership. Like, if they kept, at the very least, online play free for anyone, and kept all these extra features and retro catalogs blocked behind this subscription service, and just renamed it to something else, I don't think there'd be as many people upset about the service. Like, a lot of people are upset about the retro games being tied to a subscription service, which I can understand, especially in this day and age when everything is part of a subscription service. But you have to kind of face the fact that the Virtual Console on Wii, Wii U, and 3DS just was not successful. Like, yeah, a lot of people bought a lot of the classics that they grew up with, but for the most part, barely anyone got games that weren't from Nintendo systems. And if you're saying, oh, well, I bought games that weren't on Nintendo systems, you're watching a YouTube video right now that is specifically talking about Nintendo. I mean, not everyone that has a Switch is going to be watching videos like this. Like, you are part of a niche. I don't know if you realize that. Like, people who watch videos like this that are specifically talking about more niche gaming subjects, yeah, they're more likely to have purchased a wider variety of Virtual Console games back in the day, and are probably more likely to know how to emulate games. But for most people who owned those systems, they only bought like 2 or 3 Virtual Console games that were only like Mario and Zelda. That's it. And so Nintendo put so much time into bringing all of those other retro games that were part of those Virtual Consoles onto Wii, Wii U, and 3DS that barely anyone got them. So that's why they've bundled them into these more like Netflix style subscription services, because that's actually going to bring in money. Now, despite what some people might make you feel, you're not a bad person if you like Switch Online. I know there are a lot of people that are very vocal on Twitter about just hating Switch Online, everything that it stands for, and occasionally I do see someone saying something good about Switch Online, and someone replying basically saying that they're part of the problem. Ignore those people. The value of a service like this is purely subjective. Just because one person thinks it's not good value or just not good doesn't mean someone else can't think the exact opposite. Even though I really only saw that at the launch of the expansion pack, it might still happen, so yeah, if you like the service and someone tells you otherwise, you don't have to listen to them. Also, Twitter is just not a fun place to spend a lot of time on. I really only go on there just to check on things for just like a few minutes each day, typically, and then just leave. Twitter is basically where happiness goes to die, so use it in moderation. Oh yeah, one more thing. This is a PSA. In all the Switch Online apps, tab over here to the settings, and turn off show controls in game. And it puts these controller markers down here always on the screen. Now if you turn that off, the game is actually a little bit bigger, and those are gone. And yes, I do silently judge people who still have this turned on. Unless if you're using single sideways Joy-Con, because, you have to do a freaking Konami code to use start and suspend.